An overview of Gradescope's templated and variable length configurations and their marking workflow. Gradescope's two main assignment configurations, templated and variable length, are designed to support assessments or exams comprised of multiple questions, where each question has its own points value. It also has features specifically targeted at support of submissions originated on paper, making Gradescope a good choice for multi-question assessments involving mathematical working or symbol-heavy question responses from students. While this video is focused on providing an overview of Gradescope's variable length and templated assignment types, it's worth being aware that it also supports auto-grading of computer code submissions, as well as auto-marking of paper-based multiple-choice exams or assessments. For this latter assignment type, called Bubble Sheet by Gradescope, students respond on paper via a simple A4 answer sheet template. The completed sheets are then collected, scanned, and uploaded to Gradescope, where the platform can auto-associate the submissions with the students and auto-mark them. To better understand the following explanation of how templated and variable assignments differ, it's useful to have the following in mind. While you can mark full student submissions one at a time with Gradescope, its primary marking workflow is targeted at marking question by question across all student submissions. It's this methodology that drives the configuration of the two primary Gradescope assignment configurations and how students should preferably complete their submissions. Both templated and variable length assignments require the creation of a question outline within Gradescope when setting up the submission point. This involves entering a list of the questions included in the assignment and setting how many marks each of those questions are worth. A Gradescope templated assignment expects responses to each question be entered in a controlled and predictable place within the submission. As students are expected to electronically develop their submission and then upload it to Gradescope themselves, they will need to be provided with a pro forma style document where the layout is locked except for the spaces provided to answer questions. Microsoft Word can be used to develop a controlled template, and the resultant docx made available to students, for example. If the students are sitting an invigilated exam completed on paper, then the exam paper needs to be printed such that students have predefined space within the printed pages to answer each question. The completed papers can then be scanned and uploaded to Gradescope, a task typically undertaken by administrative staff. When setting up a templated assignment, the document provided to students for completion of the assignment itself is used to map where the answers to each question are expected to be. This is achieved during creation of the question outline by drawing boxes over the spaces provided in the uploaded template for the student responses. Gradescope will only accept PDF format for submissions to a templated assignment, regardless of whether it is staff or students undertaking the upload. Variable length assignments, by contrast, expect students to indicate where in their submission they have answered a question. They do this using Gradescope's interface when making their submission, or later after they have completed submitting their work. They might choose the latter option if they are tight up against the submission deadline, for example. For a variable length submission, students just need to be provided with an assignment brief listing the questions they are expected to answer. How students produce their submission is then up to them. It is advisable, however, that guidance is provided to students to help them with generating their submission. This is especially the case where you allow students to produce their submissions on paper and then photograph or scan their handwritten pages. Gradescope will accept a PDF or a series of images in response to a variable length assignment, and to maximize marking efficiency, you do really need students to indicate where in their submission they have answered each question. If they don't do this, you will have to look through a student's submission to find their answer to a question, thus diminishing the speed and efficiency with which marking can be completed. Gradescope presents a student with the interface for indicating where in their submission they have answered questions during the submission process, but it's worth being aware that students can bypass this, albeit with warnings if they want to or need to. Gradescope does, however, allow them to mark up their submission later, without impacting the receipt time of their submission. As noted, while you can mark submissions paper by paper, Gradescope's primary and most efficient workflow is to mark each question in the outline across all submissions. To this end, Gradescope's grading dashboard provides an overview of marking progress for each question defined in the outline for the assessment. Clicking on a question in the outline will start the process of marking a question. If the assignment is variable length, you will be taken straight into the marking interface for that question. If the assignment is templated, you will be presented with the additional option of forming answer groups, aimed at helping with the efficiency of your marking for the selected question. Forming answer groups takes advantage of student responses to the question being predictably located within the student submissions, and facilitates marking a group of responses as if it's a single response. For a few simpler and specially formatted question types, such as multiple choice questions and fill-in-the-blank type questions, Gradescope has AI features that will attempt to auto-group similar responses for you. Once it has processed the responses, you will need to confirm that the groupings are accurate. If Gradescope is unsure of a response to the question, it won't place it into a group. Once you've confirmed Gradescope selections, amending as necessary, and placed any the system is unsure of into an appropriate group, you can move on to marking those groups using Gradescope's standard marking interface. For more complicated answers, you can group responses manually. If you choose to do this, Gradescope provides an interface displaying all the responses to the selected question. You can use this interface to select similar responses and place them in groups. Once all the answers have been placed into groups, you can move on to marking each group as if it were a single response. If there are responses that don't fit into any broad groupings, these can be marked individually. If a question doesn't lend itself to grouping responses to a question, you can select to mark the question individually without forming answer groups. The process of marking a question itself is the same whether marking an individual response or grouped responses, and whether templated or variable length. Gradescope uses what it calls marking rubrics. A rubric item is used to score a question and to provide textual feedback germane to that score. You define rubric items for each question, either before marking starts or while marking is underway, and can add as many rubric items for a single question as needed. In the following templated example, the rubric items are being created while marking is taking place, and the question being marked is set to use negative scoring, Gradescope's default scoring method. Here, we select the first question to mark from the question outline shown at the grading dashboard. We add a rubric entry to reflect that the first response to this question is partially incorrect for reason A, and thus removes 1 mark from the possible 2 marks that can be scored for the question. Moving on to the next response, we find it also partially incorrect, but for a different reason. We add a rubric removing 1 mark, but provide differing feedback. The next response is fully correct, so we select the default rubric item indicating this. The next student is partially incorrect for reason A. We've already created a rubric entry for that, so just need to select the one we have already created. The next response is fully incorrect for reason C, so we create a rubric item to indicate that and select it. As we continue marking responses to the question, we can increasingly just select rubric items that have already been created. This can be done by key press rather than mouse click too. Hopefully, this illustrates one of the strengths of Gradescope's marking paradigm, especially where the cohort of students is large. In theory, by the time you've marked relatively few responses, you will have already created rubric items that can be used to mark most of the ensuing responses. Regardless of whether rubric items are created before marking starts or during marking, they can be changed or added to as needed. It's worth noting within this that rubric items are not unique to a student. If you edit the score or text of a rubric item, that item is changed wherever it has been selected. In addition to creating individual rubric items, you can also create groups of rubric items and set the group behavior such that all the options are mutually exclusive if desired. Gradescope also supports several options for providing individualized feedback that can only be seen by the student whose response it is applied to. A field is provided for text-based feedback, and additional tools are also available for direct annotation of a submission. The annotation options include insertion of text comments and being able to draw or write freehand on a submission. As already demonstrated, a question can be negatively marked, where selection of a rubric item with a score attached to it has the default behavior of removing that score from the possible total for the question. You can, however, set questions to be positively marked if preferred, where by default selection of a scored rubric item adds the score to the current score for the question, which starts at 0 by default. More than one rubric item can be selected if required, and the maximum and minimum score for a question can also be overridden, allowing for a possible negative score or extra credit for a question. For more detail on what has been touched upon in this overview, please refer to the written guidance linked in the description for this video.